It's like really great. I've done one that.
And let me once again officially welcome everybody to today's event, Fingerprint Analysis, the role of research in fortifying the forensic sciences. Today's event is sponsored by the National Institute of Justice and the Government Innovators Network. And before I turn things over to our panel, I'd like to begin, as we do each of our events, with a poll. And this is just an audience composition poll, so if you would, please select the category that best represents you and your relation to fingerprint analysis. I'm going to be administering several polling questions throughout the event today. Many of them are just opinion-based or seeking some sort of information, as this poll is. But we also have some questions today that are more of a quizzical nature. And those questions actually do have just one correct answer. And those will be designated by a Q at the beginning of the question, such as this poll. But I'm going to let the audience composition poll just finish up. And without further hesitation, I'm just going to turn things directly over to our first speaker today, Carol Henderson. Carol is the director of the National Clearinghouse for Science, Technology, and the Law at Stetson University College of Law. Carol.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone, and I'm very pleased that we have quite the audience here for this. I wanted to sort of lay the framework for what we're going to be talking about and put forth some of the issues that are really, I think, facing all of us in the forensic science community and the legal community today. And so I'm going to just start with some of my slides. And I think most of us are aware that not just in the area of fingerprints, but there are many legal challenges to science and technology today. And some in like digital image enhancement, which also affects the fingerprints area, are really being seen in the courts. And we're not finding any shy and retiring attorneys these days. I think most of you would agree.
Hey, Carol, John Morgan on the line now.
Hi, John.
Hello.
How are you? Good to hear you. John, did you want to go back? I started with my legal challenges, but I didn't know if you had some other opening remarks that you wanted to make.
Carol, I think you should go ahead and continue with that, and then in between you and our next presenter, then I'll try to catch everybody up on my stuff.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, we're just talking right now about some of the legal challenges that we're facing, particularly in fingerprints, and I think a lot of the pattern recognition areas. So we're looking at tool mark challenges, also trace evidence, handwriting, and other areas. Now, I think what's interesting is that I would call this a confluence of events regarding fingerprints, and I just wanted to go over some of the main events that have been happening lately, which is really why there's really a focus on fingerprints today. There have been, of course, some misidentifications that have occurred both in the U.S. and internationally. I think most of the examiners I know are familiar with the Mayfield case and McKee and Cowan's cases. And, of course, that has prompted intense media scrutiny. So we've had articles talking about fingerprint evidence in everything from Science magazine to, in fact, yesterday I just received the ABA Criminal Justice magazine, and they have an entire article in there titled The Limitations of Fingerprint Identifications. So I think that's something that people should be aware of, is what's being written in both the legal and scientific. I think any kind of journals, anything like that, you should be aware of if you are an examiner, of course, if you're anyone else like a lawyer or judge or someone else. We also have just had the National Academy of Sciences has their Forensic Science Committee that's been convened. They're going to have 6 meetings over the course of about a year, and they've been holding the hearings, and they're open to the public. They just had one last month, and there was a lot of questions about fingerprints as well as trace evidence, arson, ballistics evidence, etc. And in fact, I encourage people, they're open meetings, so if someone wants to come and attend them, the next meeting is June 5th and 6th, and they're held in Washington, D.C. Then we've also seen that some state commissions are being formed. And in fact, as of the 8th of May, there just was a report issued in California. It's the California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice, and they have a report and recommendations regarding forensic science evidence. So a lot of states are convening or actually recommending having commissions to be formed, and also new state legislation is coming down the pike that's going to really influence, I think, a lot of areas of forensic evidence.
Yeah, Carol, I don't know whether you saw, but in my home state of Maryland, they just passed a piece of legislation that creates a forensic science commission that's even more powerful than the one in Texas as a result of some issues revolving around ballistics that were in the state.
And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of. Virginia has things, Texas, now it looks like California, Maryland, so we're finding a lot of these different commissions being formed. And of course, some of the commissions are being formed, and then you have the legislation. Sometimes you have the legislation, and then the commission is formed, so it depends on how the state's going to approach these things. We've also seen a lot of juror expectations. They really want to have the proper use of scientific evidence, but then we also have to look and see about the CSI effect, which I believe one of the polling questions that Jim's going to give you is about whether you think the CSI effect has had an effect on your testimony. We also see that lawyers are definitely not going to back down on being an advocate, and they're testing, all expert testimony these days. And we also find a more educated defense bar than we've seen in the past. And of course, I think overall we really need to ensure the reliability of methodology and examiners. Now, when we've had a mistake being made, we have to have reports, and I think this is a very interesting report, and I commend everyone, if you haven't read this yet, the report on the erroneous fingerprint individualization that happened, of course, due to the Madrid train bombing. And this was published in the Journal of Forensic Identification in 2004, and they mentioned some of the reasons why they think there was an erroneous identification. I think this is important for lessons learned, and then also to make sure nothing like this would ever occur again, and of course very commended on the corrective actions that were taken. And I think that's something that we need to look at, is what can you put into place in your respective laboratory or wherever you're working or police department so that errors do not occur. Then I wanted to talk, of course, being a lawyer, about some of the legal issues that, a latent print examiner or anyone actually dealing with scientific evidence has to be concerned with. I think most of you are aware there are two different tests of admissibility of scientific evidence. There's the oldest test, which is the Fry test, which was a D.C. Circuit case back in 1923, which dealt with the precursor of a polygraph. And what now the Fry test, and I have to tell you, only about 16 states still adhere to the Fry test, but you have to show that it is sufficiently established to have gained general acceptance in the field in which it belongs. So any methodology, any type of thing that you're using has to be generally accepted in the field, of course, in latent print examination, in which it belongs, since we're talking about fingerprints here. Of course, that's the oldest test, and of course now it is the minority test in the United States. And then I think most people are aware, back in 1993, the U.S. Supreme Court had the Daubert case, which was a civil case where they were suing Merrill Dow because women who were ingesting these drugs in order to avoid having morning sickness when they're pregnant, they alleged that some of the limb defects of their children were due to this particular drug. And what the Supreme Court said is, now judges are gatekeepers. They have to be the ones who allow this evidence in or keep it out. And the judges have to go ahead and decide whether or not there is good methodology and is this scientifically valid. So instead of looking at only general acceptance, now we have to look at, is it tested and testable? Is there peer review publication in different journals? Is there a known or projected error rate? And that's where we have a lot of questions, I think, in the fingerprint area. Are there known standards? And you still have to look at see whether there's widespread acceptance. And I think what everybody has to keep in mind is, even if the judge doesn't decide to have a Fry or a Daubert hearing, all these same issues and questions are going to be fair game on cross-examination. The lawyers are still going to ask all of these questions about the methodology. Is it scientific? Is there an error rate? So you have to be prepared for that, even if there is no Daubert or Fry hearing in your particular case. And last but not least, I think we have to keep in mind that the jurors are the ones, unless you have a bench trial, who are going to ultimately decide whether to believe or not believe your testimony if you're a latent print examiner. So we have to consider jurors' perceptions of fingerprint evidence. And it was interesting. I was going back through our database and found that there haven't been many studies really on jurors' perceptions of fingerprint evidence. There's one that goes back to 1987. Charles Ilsley did this, and it was published by the FBI. In fact, I've met Charles many a time at the FBI Academy in Quantico. And what he was able to conclude is that jurors were more impressed by the experts' training and skill than by any education. But they all expected experts to be members of professional associations because they thought then they would be much more current in what's going on in the profession and have greater networking and really be up to date on the latest developments. I found there's another study that was done in 2005 by some FIU students, and that was actually presented at a meeting in 2005, and Aaron Danielson is one of those authors. But that's really when you think there's only been 2 studies looking at these perceptions, and jurors' perceptions of evidence of any kind, I think, are quite interesting. So we might have to see if there should be more research in this particular area as well. So what I thought I'd do is lay out some of the issues that I've seen presented and things that perhaps we're going to discuss today. The first one is, what information are the judges using to determine whether the fingerprint analysis and identification is a science? Because in federal court, in the vast majority, about 34 of the states, they're going to use a Daubert analysis. So we're going to have to look, is there good methodology? Is it science? Then the second one is admissibility no longer a significant issue? Looking at the case law, it's rare that a judge does not admit fingerprint evidence. But there may be the case coming up, particularly after the NAS report comes out, where judges may be looking a little more closely at fingerprint evidence and whether it should be admitted or not.
Now, there is one exception to that, Carol, and that's in the area of simultaneous prints. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct. And also, I did find one case in California where the judge refused to admit fingerprint evidence. But again, I would say the vast majority of cases do allow this evidence in. And in fact, what many judges say is, I will admit it, and then it's a question of weight for the jury. So the jurors have to decide if it's credible or not. Then we also have to look and see, well, could we strengthen the methodology? Then how, we need to take a closer look at this. And I think that's when, John, I don't know if you're going to talk about some of the solicitations you've had and the studies that are ongoing in the fingerprint area through NIJ funding.
Yes.
And then we also want to look and say, will having these statistical probabilities, which is some people have said this is the way to go, attached to fingerprint evidence, strengthen the discipline and its utility in court? So we can look at the pros and cons of that. And then, of course, we have to look at not just those admissibility issues, but also what other issues are examiners going to be facing. Because there's going to be challenges to education, to board certification, and many other qualifications as well. So they could be more personal challenges rather than challenges to fingerprint examination as a whole. And then also we want to look and see, are jurors demanding more evidence? This is really where we get into that CSI effect. And what's the overall effect on forensic science, whether it's collection and analysis, and also in court with procedure and presentation. But those are basically the things I thought we'd lay out as to issues we might want to discuss. I know our other presenters have a great deal of expertise, and they're going to share that with you as well. And I guess on that note, I will turn it over to John.
Okay, thank you very much, Carol, for that overview, and I certainly appreciate it. Already, there's one question that came up that I'd like to make sure that everyone I do address from one of my comments about the Maryland Forensic Science Commission and with regard to ballistics leading to the formation of a fairly strong commission in that state in just the last month. And that was actually due to a very specific case where a long-standing ballistic examiner on the state level had misrepresented his background with respect to his education and training. And he had actually been involved in cases for at least 20 years, I think maybe even longer. And as a result, a lot of the casework that he was involved in, because he had misrepresented his professional credentials, was called into question, and as a result, Maryland did create that commission. It wasn't anything specific with respect to the acceptance of ballistics, however, in general, that led to that. What I've done here, and I'm not going to go through all these slides for everybody, but I did want you all to see a rundown on the NIJ program that you could take a look at on your own. All of the slides that you'll see here during the presentations up front will be available on the web here on the Harvard site within the next 2 to 3 business days, and so you'll be able to download these at your leisure at that time. But what you'll see is a set of slides here on my presentation talking about the various disciplines within general forensics here that NIJ is involved in with respect to a research and development perspective, as well as active projects that are relevant to the fingerprint field or friction ridge, if you want to talk about it in more general terms. And here, this slide shows you the full range of the work here. The one that I would like to highlight for all of the field here for everybody's future reference is the source book of friction ridge analysis being developed at West Virginia University in collaboration with NIJ under an NIJ award, which we hope will come out here in the next few months once all the peer review has been completed. And that is going to be a real, I think, historic milestone for the friction ridge community with respect to a complete rundown on current practices as well as the scientific basis of all aspects of fingerprint examination. I've included in this presentation the full, some descriptions of all of these proposals, all of these active grants rather, for you to be able to review. I've also included a set of slides on our fast capture project, which is attempting to perhaps even replace rolled ink impressions with a direct to electronic capture device that would capture the entire polymer surface in less than a minute and 10 rolled equivalent fingerprints in less than 15 seconds. We have several active projects in that field, and I think that could also have an impact here in the sense that it will, I hope, improve the overall quality of the reference files in AFIS that are available for matching. And so I also encourage you to take a look at some of the technologies that are underway there. And I believe we might even have on this one slide let's see if it shows one of the. There you go. On the TBS, you'll see that's actually a rolled equivalent impression from one of these devices. You can see it's a very, very solid image, and if you see it in the original, it's even more amazing. These systems, as they exist now, I love to talk about them because they can literally see they're so fast and so detailed they can literally see sweat coming out of individual sweat pores and evaporating, and so that's very, very cool. Let's turn it over to Mike Campbell. Mike is a very, very experienced individual with respect to the training of folks in the fingerprint area, and has some slides also, right, Mike, to present?
Yes, John. I think they're coming up now. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the good job already, Carol and John, laying out a number of the different issues. I took the tact or the direction in the slides that you're going to see that I have for us. For some of there were 4 questions that were posed and talked about in the original announcement. And that first one being, what are the barriers to maximizing the usefulness of fingerprints was one of the first questions. And I've got a number of points here. I'm not going to try to go through every one of them in detail right now, but I'm just going to kind of lay it out from, my background goes mostly out of local law enforcement, trying to find ways to use fingerprints to get investigative leads and eventually lead to arrest and conviction of the people that are responsible for crime. And that's going to kind of be the focus of what you're going to see in these slides. It really does all start at the crime scene with the police response. And one of the things, when you talk about barriers to getting the maximum or the biggest benefit for the justice system with regard to fingerprints is the fact that law enforcement's resources are very limited in their ability to go to every crime scene and collect every piece of useful evidence that may be found at a crime scene due to manpower, due to time, due to many, many different competing constraints. But one of the things it's going to limit with, John was just making mention of what it really truly is a very exciting aspect of the future with fingerprint work, and that's the capture devices that he was just speaking of. And the impact that that's going to have is going to be adding much higher quality images on a larger scale to these databases to be searched against. But we first got to get the fingerprints out of those crime scenes to be searching them against these wonderful new databases that we're thinking about. And so it kind of all starts there, and there's severe limitations as to the amount of time and effort that can be applied in that area. The quality of the original arrest fingerprint, this kind of dovetails again with what John was just talking about. The original fingerprint cards that traditionally have been added to fingerprint databases and repositories have had a number of ups and downs over the years. And by and large in this country we have gone from a rolled inked type of collection method to an automated, what's called live scan fingerprint technology, way of capturing the images of fingerprints. One of the things that has come with that change in technology and that advancement forward with the technology is it has not really increased the quality of the images that are making their way into those AFIS databases. Just by using that technology, it has greatly sped up the process. It allows for real-time identification to hit those AFIS databases and for law enforcement to get answers back immediately as to who they've just arrested and a number of different things. It creates a platform for getting records into the AFIS database to be searched on latent searches and things like that. But I can give one example of one state that 42% of all the images in that AFIS database are unsuitable for searching or matching against because of poor quality. So that is an extreme barrier also to taking and getting the most that we can out of fingerprints, is the quality of those knowns that are going to be collected and stored in all these various AFIS databases and repositories. We need to see improvement in those areas. The lack of submissions through the criminal justice system of palm prints and what I'm going to refer to as major case prints. About 35% of all the prints that are collected at a crime scene, between 30 and 35%, actually come from areas of the palm and sides and tips of the fingers, none of which is captured on a traditional fingerprint card. And our databases right now are made up almost exclusively of fingerprint tip images, yet 30 to 35% of what we pull out of crime scenes comes from those other friction-rich surfaces that can be identified just as easy as the tips can and would lead to more solving of crime and so forth. Right now there are many agencies that do not collect those palm prints or major case prints because they're upon the advent of AFIS. When those AFIS systems became very powerful and useful for searching the tips, but nothing could be done with palms, a lot of agencies abandoned the collection of the palms because an AFIS could not use that. One of the big changes and things that bear mentioning, and Peter I'm sure will talk about this a little bit later, is the fact that live scans can now capture those images, but even more importantly, the current generation of the new AFIS systems that are being deployed right now and upgrades that are going on around the country, all of those AFIS systems now have that ability to search those palms. So creating that palm print database is another limitation right now that is going to have to be overcome with time. Juvenile arrests and arrests for minor offenses, another hindrance or a barrier that I see to maximizing the usefulness of fingerprints in law enforcement. And by that I mean this. There are many states and local agencies that either prohibit or believe they're prohibited from collecting and adding fingerprints from juvenile arrests to those AFIS databases. And when you consider the fact that between 70 and 80% of your crime over the next 10 years in a specific jurisdiction are going to come from the juveniles that you arrest today, that's a serious limitation that needs to be overcome and corrected. There shouldn't be a barrier for a juvenile arrest unless there are certain statutory limitations that would prevent those records from being added to the AFIS database. Same is true on minor charges. In the years gone by, when this automation and technology was first becoming common, there were limitations because of the size of the database and the cost of storage and things like that, all of which have disappeared with the current technology. And there aren't limitations on space anymore. And we need to add any and all folks that are arrested even on minor charges, because the person arrested today on a minor drug charge is going to be the person that's going to need to feed that habit and is going to continue to commit crime. And if we don't have those fingerprints in the database to be searched against, again, we have an artificial barrier that prevents the usefulness of fingerprints.
How often, Mike? Do you know how often it is that individuals, felony level individuals, don't have their fingerprints in either a local AFIS database or in AFIS?
Well, I'm going to say on a felony level basis, it's not as common as it used to be just a few years ago. And in traveling around the country, putting on training, obviously, you get an opportunity to ask people a lot of questions about what's going on. And I think a lot of the agencies that just up to about 5 years ago, I would say, that didn't realize they needed to always submit those fingerprint records in, that problem, I think, has been pretty much eliminated on the felony level.
What about the issue that you mentioned with respect to the poor images in some of the AFIS databases in particular? And I know that the FBI CJIS division is very concerned that the overall quality in AFIS has been degrading, not quite as fast as what you're reporting, but significantly. What kind of data do we have? Do we have data by state or anything else in order to determine, where are these poor images? Is there something specific that can be done now to try to improve that situation?
Well, a couple of things in that, John. First of all, there used to be very hard data that would tell you kind of what was going on in that submitter community from those individual departments or states. When the the predecessor to the AFIS system would return a fingerprint card that was of poor quality to that submitting agency, and then we record and track what percent of their submissions had to be returned because of lack of quality. One of the things that you've seen happen since the advent of a large-scale use now of live scan, instead of it being the exception, it's the rule. There has been a decision that had to be made, let's say within the fingerprint community and the 10-print community, which was, if I take and reject a card, typically those cards never came back because it would have required that person that had been arrested to be picked up again, brought back in, get re-fingerprinted, and things like that, and they did not receive those cards back because of that. And when you are talking about creating a database, and let's just use an example like I was thinking about from a particular state where 4 out of the 10 fingers on a card are of substandard quality that you really aren't going to be able to match against them in the future, the thought became, rather than return the card and never get those other 6 good fingers back in the system, maybe we need to just take that card, get those 6 images that are good, and that's been going on pretty much around the country now, and as a result of that, you've gotten a lot of fingers that have made their way in, and people aren't tracking, at least not that I've been exposed to. I'm sure individual states keep track to some extent. I just don't have good first-hand knowledge right now anymore, but a lot of those fingerprints now make their way into the databases. We're hoping for interaction between the submitting agency using a live scan and the repository, or like the State Bureau or the CJIS people, that when they get poor quality fingerprints in, that while that person is still in custody, they have an opportunity to get the person re-fingerprinted, but then you go through a whole other layer of bureaucracy, and that's that those fingerprints are recorded in a jail environment, and they're moving those people through because of their various rights and the amount of time they can hold people, and it hasn't been quite as effective yet.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry I took you off your... yes, Peter?
This is Peter Komarinski. Can I add a comment to that?
Please.
To Mike's comments? There are a couple things that have changed with the advent of the live scan devices, and as to whether or not the databases are deteriorating, there are some who would hold that the overall quality of the databases are certainly changing. But bear in mind that these databases are also increasing dramatically in terms of the number of people who are being fingerprinted, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes during my presentation. But in many cases, as Mike pointed out very well, the FBI was very diligent in terms of the quality of the images that they would originally receive. And in many cases, the states and local units of government would be willing to take whatever they had with, again, the philosophical approach, it's better to have something than nothing. At least we have the 6 images or the 4 images as opposed to no images on this person. What has typically happened on AFIS systems is when the person is rearrested, there's a quality indicator that's given to the images that are originally onto the AFIS system. If the quality indicator of the new images coming in are superior to the quality of the images that are currently on file, they can be replaced depending upon what the local policies are. In addition, the live scan devices also have a quality, the newer ones have a quality control feature on them, so that right at the point of capture, the operator, whether it's a booking officer or the arresting officer, whoever, has some indication of the quality of the image going in. Now, that quality, though, is defined by whoever wants to define it. What those of us who like to have more folks identified through latent prints, crime scene prints, we'd certainly like to see everything going on a nail-to-nail roll for all 10 fingers. However, it's very possible to make a 10-print identification, that is an identification based upon arrest or a job application, whatever, with much less than that nail-to-nail information. But one of the driving features in this move to automation has been that the systems themselves and the capture device, the live scan device, can operate as little as 500 pixels per inch. For 10-print identification and for a lot of latent print identification, this is sufficient for the AFIS system to either in 10-print world point out the candidate, the correct candidate, and make the identification, or in the case of the latent print, to bring a list of candidates that the latent examiner looks to. However, since many latent examiners want to look at both the latent print and compare it against an actual physical card, this reduction from an ink and roll with all the various elements of gray and ink penetration into the paper, what have you, into a flat 500 pixels per inch image does not give them the kind of detail they make in some of their candidate work to determine whether or not this image does in fact match the person whose fingerprints are on file.
Now, I have a question from the audience about some of this, because both in our fast capture work and in the AFIS live scans, the issue is, how can you prevent manipulation of or identification error with digital images? I'm assuming that, as in with the DNA case, the database is only used as a matching procedure to identify an individual, but before you go into a court, that you would retake the fingerprints and do a new comparison. What are the safeguards what are the systematic safeguards that are in place with respect to, not completely relying on the digital images?
I'll try to answer that from the fingerprint examiner side, and then I'd like to hear what Peter would think from the technology side with regard to that question, John. You've already kind of really hit the nail on the head. When an examiner has made an identification, if the original preliminary decision was made off of a digital image like you're speaking of, there always is that effort then to, before you go to court or before you, in many cases, report your decision, to acquire an original image or original fingerprint card, either from out of that repository or by acquiring it from the prisoner directly. And then the examiner makes a complete examination over with the original, we'll call it the original record or the known exemplar of that person, before they either report that result or go to court. So they do examine it to make sure that there aren't some of these anomalies and some of the various things that possibly could get in with digital imaging. There's great care and concern taken on that issue. Many times an examiner has been asked in court by a judge in particular to take a set of fingerprints of the person that's actually in court and then re-examine those to the prints that they're there to testify to. And so that is a concern that everybody through the system has, and that's been being addressed for quite some time in that manner. Peter, do you have anything that you would add?
Yeah, let me just add a couple points to what Mike said, and that is frequently there are, in addition to the one print examiner making an identification, it is frequently validated by a second latent print examiner.
Verified, yes.
Verified, so that they're both in agreement. And also, if there's been any change to the latent print, not change to the latent print, but change to the background, for example, that the latent print came from, to make the latent print more clear, all that has to be documented in terms of the changes. And if asked, the latent print examiner has to be able to go back and show that latent print all the way back to its original form to ensure that there has been no manipulation of any of the information, any of the evidence, and that is in fact a true representation of what was found at the crime scene.
Okay. Now I want to apologize to you, Mike, because I sort of hijacked you with my questions, and I know you still have some slides left. We are about 40 minutes in, so why don't you take another 5-10 minutes to run through the remainder of your slides.
Alrighty, I'll try to get through it even quicker than that, hopefully.
Okay, good.
Well, essentially, one of the other things that I'd like to kind of make mention of is that currently the demand that's out there, and it's not just driven by CSI, but just by the nature of crime scene investigation and criminal investigation, that fingerprints have been around for over 100 years and have been found to be very, very useful. And one of the big things that created a big stir and excitement in the law enforcement community was when you had an AFIS system that came on board. You, for the first time, had the ability to take a complete unknown out of a crime scene and try to have it searched and matched to a set of knowns in an AFIS database. Before, you had to know who the suspects were and then manually compare them. And once AFIS came on the scene, now we had the ability to do searches of huge databases and then make manual comparisons of just a few suspects that came up on those AFIS candidate lists. And that created a complete turnaround in the expectations of people like detectives and investigators and chiefs and sheriffs, that we can take and go on the offensive with fingerprints that we pull out of crime scenes and find out who are doing all these, committing these crimes and trying to use them to solve crime. Well, that has driven up expectations very, very high. What hasn't quite matched that expectation at all is the ability of crime labs and even local agencies that try to do fingerprint identification work to match that huge demand. There are many more fingerprints that are recovered out of crime scenes that need to have their chance to be matched and searched and matched, I should say, that due to the limitation of resources, they're not even being addressed or looked at. In many places, for instance, a state lab is pretty much limited to taking and searching fingerprints for major cases and cases that are already on their way to court where suspects have already been identified. But many folks in law enforcement and certainly the victims of crime have great expectations. Or is it a fingerprint that's a complete unknown that you pull out of a crime scene or off a murder weapon or that gun that's sitting under the front seat or the bag of drugs that's found in the trunks of cars, is to find out who is that person by searching these databases. And the time and effort it takes to do that, we don't have the resources to do all of that. We encourage officers to go out and get them. Our juries have been encouraged to watch for and pay attention to evidence like that, and we're all struggling to keep up with the demands of that. And that, I think, we all need to pay attention to. Even the automation and the use of technology that Peter can talk about a little bit too, that's on the forefront, is not going to be able to alleviate that high demand versus the amount of resources that we can throw at it right now. I'm going to skip over this slide here. One of the things that I do want to talk about real quickly is something that one of the questions was posed originally on, how can we better share AFIS technology? And I'd like to throw out for consideration and get some feedback from the folks that are participating about taking and regionalizing AFIS systems and databases. I'm going to give a real quick example. King County Sheriff's Department operates a regional AFIS system for all of the law enforcement agencies in that part of the state. And they've pooled their resources and now have local control, direct local control over what goes into their databases, the quality of it, and what gets searched and how often and when. And they've had a tremendous amount of success with that. The WIN network out in the Western Identification Network is another example of pooling resources and regionalizing and creating more opportunity to search many more fingerprints from out of crime scenes against many other suspects. And of course we have the AFIS system now that's been built out, and we can do a nationwide search. But we need to have more trained examiners and more access to more AFIS terminals in order to get the biggest benefit. And at this point, I think I'd like to turn it back over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike, and that's very helpful. Let's move over to Peter Komarinski, and you've already heard from Peter a little bit in response to some of the questions that were raised with Carol and Mike's presentations. Peter's been working with us on a couple of projects along the lines of what Mike was just referring to. For example, trying to improve the interstate sharing of latent print information so that there can be more better matches occurring outside of just a single jurisdiction, because as we know from the DNA world, where that's done routinely, that kind of interstate matching has enormous power. Peter.
Thank you, John. I'd like to begin just by adding something to the Mike's final comments here about regionalization. I worked in New York State. I worked with some of the most talented people on the planet. In the original development of the AFIS system, they had it pretty well designed when I came on board. But the effort that they put into making this system as good as it is, and the foresight that they had, has led to a variety of accomplishments, including the establishment of a statewide, not just a regional, but a statewide database that allows all the communities within the state to search against one central database. And likewise, for each of the latent print stations, if they're at the major cities, to have access to this database. And so it's even one step beyond the regionalization that Mike talked about. And you still have a control of your database, you have control of your searches going in, your latent print searches that are going in, and you also have the ability to put as many or as few through to also go through and search some other databases. Part of what I'm going to be speaking about today is not the individual prints, but how do we maximize this tremendous power that we have in AFIS systems, automated fingerprint identification systems. And I recognize that not everybody may necessarily be as up to speed as some other folks on AFIS systems, so I'm going to spend just a moment talking about what they are and how they work. If you're looking on the slide right now, you see me and a whole bunch of stuff, but let me break that down real quick to tell you. I've had 25 years of AFIS experience. I've testified. I'm the chair of the AFIS committee for the International Association for Identification, and then I've written a book on AFIS systems and also contributed to some other books. I find this stuff absolutely fascinating. The technology that's available should, in theory, be able to make a latent print identification on virtually any latent print that's found. But because of a variety of complex issues, it doesn't always happen. And that's part of the project that John was mentioning, working with the NIJ about it. I'll pull up this next slide here. What are AFIS systems? Well, we've heard about them, and if you've been watching a popular television program, you know that these are some sort of fingerprint systems that everybody has that can make identifications in a nanosecond, and the word match flashes across the screen, particularly for latent prints. It's not quite the case. AFIS systems are built on finger images in which unique devices, which are called coders, are able to extract features such as ridge endings, bifurcations. They'll mark where the islands are. They'll also mark the direction of flow, of the ridge flow. And each of these points is considered to be a minutia. And varying manufacturers have slightly different algorithms for how their coders will extract these minutia points. These minutia are what the AFIS system uses to make their matches, and the images behind them are the ones that people use to make their identifications. 10-print applications, that is, the people who are applying for a job, people who have been arrested, what have you, can have anywhere from, I'd call it 40 to maybe 150, 160, maybe even 200 of these unique locations on their finger images. And therefore, it's not difficult to effect an identification against the known exemplar on those applications. Somebody's applying for a job, somebody's been fingerprinted. You've got a lot of information there. It's a little bit different on a latent print world where the person, in fact, did not intend to leave that finger image and does not intend to be captured. AFIS systems compare these image features, the print in question, with whatever enrolled prints are available. Now, in the iAFIS system, they have just about 50 million records that are there. New York State, which I'll use for an example, has 6 million records that are 10-print records, and they have in which they use the number 2 and the number 7 fingers, the 2 index fingers, for their primary identification. But of those 6 million, there's a subset of approximately 3 million, of which all 10 of the finger images are available for searching. And those are available for searching for crime scenes, for latent print searching. And many of these AFIS systems will also interface with the CCH, a computerized criminal history, or some other term that's used to bring up the rap sheet. And that, in effect, is how an inquiring agency who's booking someone at a live scan is able to find out about their history, whether there's any wants or warrants out for them, whether or not they are using an alias, whether or not it's the first time they've been arrested. And then the search would also continue on to the FBI for some information there. And this is in the old days, and the old days can be as recently as yesterday. This is a pretty laborious and time-consuming process, but it's gotten much faster through the technology, part of it driven by the increased number of people who are being fingerprinted for job applications. Job applications, if you're dealing with the young, if you're dealing with the elderly, if you're dealing with anyone who has a security background that has to be checked, these folks are being fingerprinted now. Not only are they being fingerprinted, but in many cases they're being charged an application fee to offset the cost of the processing both at the state as well as the federal level.
Now, Peter, this is actually a good image for us to stop on, if you don't
Sure.
mind, and just ask a general question that's been raised in about the statistics of fingerprint examination. Mm-hmm. It seems that the community feels that each of these red circles, each of these minutiae, are independent statistically. That is, if you choose any 10 of them, that the value of those as an individualization is equivalent to any other 10. Now, I might, and the reason why that's an important point, and you can see here, is that, for example, here in the lower right here, let's see if this particular over here, you'll see, for example, a very short line.
Yes.
And it looks like those 2 points could be related in some way with respect to the morphology of the fingerprint and how it was formed. And so those 2 points may not give you as much information as independent points like this one over here with this one on the other side over on the left-hand side. Let's see if this little doodads work on there. That one over there on the left. And so how can an examiner or even an AFIS system take into account, or is it even possible at this stage to take into account how independent these different features are?
Well, let's talk about the 10-print world first, where it's a job applicant or somebody who's been arrested. If someone's been arrested or somebody's a job applicant, you have the opportunity to take that finger image and roll it nail to nail. Ideally, that's what you'd like. And as I mentioned, you can get as many as 150, 100, 200 different minutia points on here. So this is a very limited number on number of minutia that would be on here. So let's say you've got 100 minutia points, and you've got on your second finger, your right index finger, and on your left index finger, you've also got, let's call it 98 minutia points. Now, you've got 90%, 95% of those minutia that are matching, maybe even more. You combine those two sets together, you've got a 95% here, you've got a 93% here. AFIS systems can have an accuracy in excess, for 10-print applications, in excess of 99%. In fact, well over 99%. And depending upon what you want to put into your AFIS system, you can make that very, very high. The issue, of course, becomes how much more accurate do you want to go if you're at 99.999 to get that additional additional 9 in there, in terms of how you would spend that money for other resources. This is a biometric, and as with all biometrics, it's not 100%.
Can I jump in here?
Well, just let me one thing,
all right,
Mike. These minutia are being extracted by a coder, an automated device, which the manufacturers have, and they get progressively better as they go through and progressively more accurate. But when it comes, and that's why they're able to, in many cases, effect what's referred to as a lights-out search on 10-print application. That is, there's sufficient information to be 99.999% positive that on a job application or arrest, this image does in fact belong to this person who we have enrolled in our database. In addition to the minutia, you can also see the ridge flow, which is obviously useful to the examiner. That scene changes entirely in the course of latent prints. Latent prints does not use a lights-out variant because there's just not enough information on there to do it. Now, Mike, I'll turn it over to you for a moment.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to take a chance right here, actually just even a few minutes ago, to clarify a couple of things here. We're talking here purely how AFIS systems look at fingerprints, how AFIS systems try to manage and deal with the sorting that an AFIS system does. I think it's important for everybody, especially those that are not familiar with fingerprint identification work and AFIS technology, that AFIS systems are fancy sorting machines.
Exactly.
When a fingerprint examiner compares and looks at this fingerprint, and I'll try to use the fancy little clicker device here as well.
Yeah.
When an examiner looks at these fingerprints and compares them, it's very different than how Peter's describing how an AFIS attacks that issue or that problem. It's a totally different function, held to a different standard and a different level of comparison and evaluating that goes on.
Exactly.
And I think it's important that, especially for those that are uninitiated, that everybody understands that and realizes that.
And for the latent print searches, when you do have just those few minutia on there, as you mentioned, the AFIS is a big sorting machine. So instead of having the examiner go through 3 million records, 30 million images, it comes up and says, you know, based upon the minutia that the coder has put in, and or the minutia that the examiner has put in based upon his and her experience in working with that machine, these are the best candidates in the database.
And then the actual first comparison starts to take place by the examiner.
Exactly.
This is
the latent print examiner's work hasn't changed in the sense of making that comparison.
Not at all.
What has changed is that the need to go through and look through all those records is no longer there. And you've got such a large database you mentioned earlier about just the cases that you had from your known burglars and what have you. That gets expanded to the region or the state.
Okay, this is an important point. So if we could just hold on to it for just a minute, and let me put basically the same question to you, Mike, as I did to Peter, and that is this. Let's just take a look up here in the upper left, and you'll see another one of these lines. I got the dot right on the center of it now, where you have 2 points that look related to one another. Just from the point of view of somebody like myself who's never been an examiner, would the examiner consider that those two completely independent points, and do we have a basis for being able to make that judgment?
Well, how I would try to answer that would be that the examiner wouldn't be looking at them as totally, completely independent points, which is kind of how an AFIS looks at things, the geometrics of things and so forth. The examiner is going to, every one of these, for instance, some people call them short ridges, where you have a ridge that's terminated or ended on one end, and immediately just a little short distance away, it terminates and ends on the other end. Let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. That same short ridge that you were talking about earlier, there's another one that you pointed out earlier.
Yes.
Every single one of those features, it has to be a combination of several things. It's going to be that I notice that particular ridge, and in this case we're going to start calling them friction ridges, and these individual ridges that are unique from before birth, the biological uniqueness of how they are formed, it has to be that I'm going to notice that particular ridge right here ends exactly and precisely in that spot, and in relationship to everything else around it. And if I can just back up and give you an example of what I mean by the other information around it, let's take a look, if I can get you to look at the cursor here going across the screen, and this was something that Peter was alluding to, and that's the pattern or ridge flow. So I'm going to start the process of looking at this and think about this fingerprint by first trying to determine its pattern type. In this case, we would call it a right slant loop. And then I'm going to look at the ridge flow. And there are tons of different features that I could sit here and bore you to tears with that an examiner is going to be looking at. For instance, the center area here, where you have a recurving ridge that comes around very tightly and turns around and comes out the same side it came in, I'm going to be looking at the distance between that feature and what we would call a delta formation in a fingerprint over here, and look at the intervening ridges. I'm going to be looking at the flow, the overall flow of the ridges in the area. Let's go back up to that short ridge that you were looking at earlier. I'm going to have to see that short ridge appearing exactly that many ridges away from other features. These features are going to have to be this ending that I'm trying to highlight right now. Hopefully you can see it. That ending would have to be ending in the exact same direction that you see it here in relationship to the ridge on either side of it, that there's no other activity other than that's a continuous ridge, and so forth and so on. I know you don't want to turn this into a fingerprint comparison 101 class, but I guess I would like to say that it isn't that one individual point just out there in space that we're going to take and just, make that such a specific special thing. It has to be that special event, that it's the ridges in sequence. It's what is happening on each one of these individual ridges that you can see in that one fingerprint on the screen right now. Exactly and precisely what each of those ridges are doing in their relationship to each other, that puts us on the path of making that individualization and allows us to make those decisions. And AFIS can only plot points out in space, and then, as Peter suggested, come up with a scoring mechanism to put it on a candidate list to spare the examiner from looking at 300 million possible fingers to look at and compare a single print from a crime scene to, and says, hey, instead of looking at everything, start with this one, then this one, and now, in a very critical manner, the examiner will take each of those candidates and see how these things line up to make a decision about whether or not they come from that same source or not.
Well, Mike, can I chime in? This is Carol. I was wondering, because you have years of experience of doing this, how is someone trained to recognize the significance, I guess, of these different patterns? Because that gets back to the questions that we have, of course, in Daubert, and how do we know it's science, and those types of things.
The actual training method, or?
No, I think more like, you can't say you know it when you see it kind of a thing, but like, obviously, you're explaining this, but how do we know the significance, and then this is the same person, and there might be 500 other people that have the exact same ridge flow, because have there been studies that, tell us, well, we know that this only occurs in X number of people, and we've done studies to find that out. I think that's leading toward our, is it science, and then how do we actually recognize it?
Okay, I think I understand the question.
Okay.
Well, let me start by trying to say it this way. An examiner is going to be shown or taught that there's what we call 3 levels of detail that we pay attention to. You don't exclusively just think about and only analyze one aspect. You pay attention to all 3.
Mm-hmm.
The very first one is going to be this pattern, or this ridge flow that's present in the individual finger. And I'll just use it as a real quick example. Identical twins have the exact same DNA. They've been programmed, we'll call it, to turn out, same eye color, same hair color, eye shape, and so forth and so on. Yet they'll have completely and totally different fingerprints. And that's because of the way the ridges are formed and the biological uniqueness that goes into the formation of those ridges. That first the examiner's got to understand that that uniqueness is present.
Well, can I ask you this too? Because is ridge flow, because before, and I've been around a while, is that the same as people saying that there's, loops or whorls or whatever I guess, is that the same thing you're talking about with ridge flow, or is that something different?
That would be very comparable to what I'm talking about with ridge flow. I'm going to say it this way. That first level of detail, let me try to explain it this way, but it's the most obvious thing that you can see, even to the point of not having to put a magnifier on it and look at it very closely. The fingerprint we're looking at here is greatly enlarged. We all know that. But I can see that there is a pronounced ridge flow that also tells me what type of a pattern that fingerprint has. Now, human beings share 3 different patterns: arches, loops, and whorls, like you were just referring to in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Loops are very common. As a matter of fact, the fingerprint that's up on that screen right now, 65% of all the fingers in the world happen to come from the loop family, we'll call it. Half of them are going to be a right slant like you see here. The other half are going to be coming in and flowing from the opposite direction. Left slants, we would call them. 30% approximately are what we refer to as whorls, and about 5% come from what we're going to call the arch family. So you have a very pronounced, very obvious ridge flow and pattern that's present in everybody's fingers. And I would start by looking at and comparing it at that level. Obviously, if I look at this fingerprint and I'm comparing it to something that would be an arch fingerprint, which was basically its ridges that come in one side, slightly rise in the center, and flow out the opposite side, even those participants today that are not trained examiners would quickly make a decision that that can't come from the same finger or the same person.
So in other words, when you're saying that, I'm thinking of the old ABO blood typing. Okay, so many people had the same thing you're saying, so many people have the same pattern or ridge flow. So is it really down to when you're saying level 3 detail is where we're going to be able to make I guess the tough call here as to that belongs to this particular individual? Well,
if I could just kind of proceed to that second level, because I think it'll give you a better answer to your question, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
Once I've decided that I have consistency in these 2 fingers at that pattern level and then the ridge flow, even amongst loops, for instance, if I can very quickly try to get everybody to look at the area highlighted on the screen right now, that center core area, and then this delta area, most other loops are not going to have just that few intervening ridges between those 2 points, those 2 areas on that fingerprint pattern.
Well, how do we know that? That's, I guess, I'm asking the hard questions that I know you'd get asked in court is, how would you know that? Have there been studies done that have said that these don't occur except in X number of cases?
Well, Carol, one of the ways we look at that, and one of my observations is, unfortunately, there's not a lot of research done in these areas. But consider, number one, that the better the quality of the image, the darker the image, the more you have, the more information is available to the examiner, whether it's captured electronically or whether it's captured on paper as the exemplar. That would be number one. Number two, as you start looking at these images here, the pattern types that you talk about, and AFIS systems really no longer use a multitude of patterns, but they break them down into 4 that Mike mentioned. But in terms of the accuracy, before when agencies go out, as the FBI will with their CJIS, they'll require a level of accuracy in both their 10-print applications as well as their latent print applications. And one of the ways you can conduct tests is to seed the database with known exemplars, and then with your 10-print processing and your latent print processing, you want to see, do you hit the targets you expect to see? Do they come back as a candidate on the candidate list? And if they come back on the candidate list, at what point on the candidate list do they appear? Mm-hmm. And that should be consistent, provided that the database remains consistent in terms of size and what have you. What changes, though, is when you start getting into the latent print world, you don't always have exactly the same kind of image. You may have what to most of us appears to be a smudge. The latent print examiner can tease out some minutia points. Perhaps a coder may also be able to tease out some minutia points. And through that combination of the latent print examiner's skill in using the AFIS system, they're able to search the database, the AFIS database, and then come up with candidates. Those candidates may not have 100% score. It doesn't flash across the screen and say match, 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 but it's enough to say we have a sufficient number of minutia points as well as the pattern, if that can be determined, that you really should take a look at this and see if it does match, and if it doesn't, go on to the next one. Yeah. And that's really how they work. So in terms of accuracy, I'm not aware of any national, international study on that topic per se, but on individual AFIS systems, it's a condition before you sign the vendor, typically to go through sure. as part of a benchmarking test and say, these are the accuracy parameters I want. Show me that you can meet them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that I see some blue dots for speeding up out in the audience. I do wanted to have this particular conversation because it really gets to the heart of the issues around fingerprints right now. That is, how do we determine the science behind a friction ridge examination, and how does a fingerprint examiner present their work in court? And so what we've just heard actually is very, as Carol alluded to, is something that is not too dissimilar from all of those considerations that a court must hear, and how an examiner must think about doing these comparisons. There is, by the way, and you'll see back in my presentation, you'll see 3 or 4 active projects looking at these statistics of latents and to figure out just how unique all these different points are. Peter, if we could go back to you, and you could just finish up real quick on your slides, and then we can get to more of the questions.
Okay, we talk about how do we share AFIS. This is one of the questions we're dealing with. Again, with the 10-print applications. 10-print, think of 10-print as people who are coming in. It's a historical term. It's a little confusing to some at first, but you're trying to make an identification on somebody who either wants to be fingerprinted because they're a job applicant, or they may not want to be fingerprinted because they've been arrested, but nonetheless you have them available. You can search your own database. You can also search the FBI database, which is getting much quicker. For the latent print applications, though, that's a whole other world. You don't necessarily have the good quality images. You don't have all 10 images that the criminal was kind enough to leave at the crime scene and make sure that they were rolled nail to nail. You also don't have the access to other databases except perhaps your own, and possibly to the FBI if you're enrolled in one of their programs, including the Universal Latent Workstation program, or if your AFIS system has some arrangement with another AFIS. By and large, that doesn't happen. So if you find a latent print, you're pretty much restricted as a practical matter to your own database. Now, some of the challenges that come out of this is that they don't intercommunicate. not all these forensic AFIS systems, and by forensic we're talking about the 10 print and the latent print applications, not civil applications. They don't talk to each other in a latent print world. They may communicate in a 10 print world from the state to the FBI with perhaps some pointer to another state. But for latent prints, it's pretty much local unless you're one of the very few handful of agencies that have access to the FBI. There's also an erosion of experienced AFIS personnel, particularly for the latent examiners. What I found, I think, is there's the managers who are coming in now operating the AFIS systems or managing the AFIS systems don't necessarily have the identification background. And so they become more IT people, which is very good, and they have wonderful, wonderful IT products, but it may be at some of the expense that operational, either 10 print and or latent print examiners would like to have in terms of particular options, particular opportunities. These experienced people are the ones who really make the decisions in terms of how these systems are going to operate and how all of this stuff is going to be affected. Anytime there's an upgrade, anytime there's a required maintenance, that requires people to do that. You need people to direct the growth of your information systems, and you can't necessarily be led by the industry interests. And although the industry interests can be very good, each agency, each entity, I believe, has its own particular interest, and it must put those forward and make sure that industry can respond to their needs, as opposed to simply walking over and saying, I'll take one of those models, and I guess that's the best I can do. And people also use these AFIS systems. We have to make sure that we have enough trained latent print examiners, we have enough 10 print examiners to go through and continue this process. But we find that more groups are being fingerprinted, as I mentioned earlier. That's increasing the size of the database. There are more people that are being printed as search and retain, which simply means that in the past there may have been some folks who, for job application purposes, had their fingerprints taken. They were searched on a database. The report goes out saying, we have nothing on this person, and that was the end of it. That doesn't happen as much anymore. Those fingerprints are being captured, they're being retained, they're being sent to the FBI. There's now a record someplace. And that, of course, expands both the size of the database as well as the need and the reliance upon these information systems. I think you talked about the fast capture device. Austin Hicklin and his group with MITRE and with NIST extended fingerprint feature sets. We mentioned lights out, 10 print applications, palm prints, and multimodal identifications. Each of these emerging technologies, multimodal identification being, for example, identification on more than one biometric. It could be a finger image, it could be an iris scan, it could be a finger image and a palm. All these are fascinating. They're coming down the pike. But remember, we're dealing with legacy databases that, as Mike mentioned, may have varying degrees of quality of information. And you can't put a palm print retroactively onto a database if that person is not subsequently arrested or invited to come back and give a palm. So while they're out there and available, it's kind of like saying, you know, there's a new computer out here or there's a new car that does X, Y, and Z, but unless you have the resources to bring that into your local entity, your local agency, and make it work for you with a successive training, maintenance, and everything else that goes on to it, that it's just something that's out there and available, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have. And I think we were talking earlier about the CSI effect. The fact that something exists doesn't mean necessarily that everybody has it, that everybody can fully exploit it, and that everybody knows the benefits and limitations to it. Unfortunately, in the latent print world, I've not seen that the latent print portions of AFIS systems are necessarily overtaxed. There are a lot of latent prints that could be searched that for whatever reason don't leave a desk. They're searched perhaps once and that's it. So we really need to use the power of the AFIS system in conjunction with the latent print examiners and everybody else who feeds into this to get more latent prints in and to be able to affect these identifications.
Yeah, one question along that line, Peter, from the audience was how many states lack a statewide AFIS system? There's one individual, Josh, was saying that in Nebraska they have a statewide AFIS system. But are there many states that lack that or don't have that?
To my knowledge, most states do not have a statewide system. They may have AFIS systems within regions, and then rely upon the federal system if they're going to do another latent print search, or perhaps they just mail the latent prints. Again, speaking in terms of 10-print applications and its subsequent latent print applications. It's a rarity, I believe. There are places like Connecticut have it, New Jersey, New York, a few others, but one of the advantages of a larger system, as Mike pointed out with the region, is not only the size of the database, but also all the maintenance, upkeep, training, headaches that kind of go into these things, where I don't have to, for example, maintain my telephone system to know that it works. I pay a monthly fee, and that's it. If I had to design my own telephone system, I'd be in a world of trouble. Same thing with the AFIS systems, and in many cases, these services are available to law enforcement community without charge. Or some minimal charge to another legal entity.
Can I elaborate a little bit on the question?
Yes.
I think you're going to find that most, depending on what Josh was really asking, you're going to find that most states, I believe every one of the 50 states has an individual fingerprint repository, criminal history database that they each maintain for their own criminal history records, which then they upload to the FBI to create the criminal history at the FBI level. The 10-print system, or the criminal history side of it, like Peter was just mentioning, that's pretty well in place in all 50 states. What isn't in place, though, would be access at a statewide level or basis for latent prints to be searched against that same state system. There you have to, in most places yet, you have to take the fingerprints that are recovered from those crime scenes, submit them into the state crime laboratory, for instance, and then wait your turn for them to be able to work your individual case. Mm-hmm. The individual departments or agencies don't have direct access to search those things. But each of the 50 states has that statewide database or system.
Is there much being done to increase, as asked by Amy Poland, is there much being done to provide financial assistance or anything of that nature to increase access at the state and local level to AFIS systems?
Well, that's an excellent point, and actually it's one of the items on my slides. But we have a new national identification system that's going to be rolling out. Next generation identification. It may take another name by the time it finally comes through, which will be a tremendously advanced system which will include such features as major case prints, palm prints that Mike was talking about earlier. They have provisions for capturing other biometrics or storing other biometrics. NIST has just finalized, through input from a lot of people with a lot of hard work on the part of many people and organizations, the new transmission standard, the 2007 transmission standard, which includes other biometrics. So the FBI is poised to be able to collect a lot more information and ideally be able to use this additional information, additional biometric information, for making identifications. That being said, what we don't see, I haven't seen in any event, is a corresponding increase in funding. Something like the National Criminal History Improvement Project program, which provided funds to state and local governments to tap into the resources of the current IAFIS, that is, to be able to allow the states and locals to communicate with them using these various standards and protocols, so that it could be the very efficient, very fast transference of information leading to identifications. So unless there's additional money that's coming forth, I think many areas will be hard-pressed to be able to take advantage of all these new technologies, new biometric modalities that will be included in some place like the next generation identification. In addition, something like palm prints, if I'm a manager of an identification bureau and I'm told that palm prints will be coming in, that provides me certainly with more information, a bigger database to search against, what have you, for both 10 prints and latent prints. But if I don't have a corresponding increase in the number of personnel that I can use to search, let's say in the case of latent prints, I wouldn't expect a monumental rise on the number of identifications, because if my folks are working 40 hours a week, and presumably there's always work coming in, whether they make their identifications on 10 prints or 10 prints and palms or palms only, there's only so much work that they can do. Now clearly they will make identifications that they didn't make in the past because something like a palm wasn't available. But when you're doing one thing, you're not doing something else. And it becomes really the challenge to the managers and the challengers to the administrators to figure out what is going to give you the biggest bang for the buck. How are you going to make the greatest number of identifications using the resources, both the technology and the personnel that you have available to you to affect these identifications.
Peter, do you have any other, because I want to make sure we get to as many of these questions as possible, do you have any other critical points from your slides that you want to make sure we get out there?
Click this one slide here. We don't know what we don't know. We really need to follow a business model in terms of some of our processing, which we don't always do on latent prints. In addition to the four items that you mentioned, there's really very little research that's been done historically in the latent AFIS latent print area. That is, how to maximize the AFIS systems to produce more candidates for identification. Really got to make the technology work for us. It would be good if there was a way that we could talk about some sort of uniformity in data collection. I can give you a number of identifications that were made, and you can give me a number of identifications made from your agency, and you may be talking about one person who counts for 5 idents, and I could be talking about one person who counts for 1 ident. We don't have that uniformity in identification processing. Sometimes we just don't know what the questions are that we want from the vendors to build into the system. So I have this, the vendors will say we'll give them what they ask for, but the local folks may not really know what to ask for. So there needs to be more education, more process in terms of affecting the greatest number of identifications. And also, from what I'm saying, there's a diminished number of latent print examiners, 10 print examiners as well, but particularly latent print examiners. So we could find ourselves in a situation in which we have absolutely tremendous, tremendous identification technology, but the people who can really fully exploit this technology gets fewer and fewer. With that, I'll conclude and turn it over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. One of the questions that has come up as an interesting one, but a more straightforward one in some ways, and that is it true that there are certain individuals that do not have fingerprints? Mike, maybe you might be able to address that.
Well, my answer to that would be no, unless there is some severe birth defect type of thing. One of the things that I think people get confused about, and maybe that's generating this question, is trying to use a lot of this technology. One of the hindrances is that not everybody can have fingerprints taken, and some people kind of think that's because they're missing fingerprints. And that's not the case. Their ridges are too worn for the machines to be able to capture the images, things like that. But other than some severe birth defect type of scenario, everybody has them.
Yeah, they just might not be visible. I met one individual on a tour of Israel. It was a fascinating guy, and I swear I could not detect with my eye the friction ridges, even if they were underneath the skin. I could not see them. It was really extraordinary, and his toes were the same way. It was very weird.
His friction ridge skin, and I'm glad you kind of made that point right now, because that friction ridge skin that we're talking about and thinking about comes from the palmar surface of the hands and the bottoms of the feet and toes, and that friction ridge skin is different than the skin on the rest of our body. And so obviously something had happened to, I don't know if it would have been during when the ridges were forming, if it's a birth defect type of thing, or if it was some kind of an accident after the fact. But that would be the rarest of individuals. I haven't heard of a case like that, and I'd be really interested to meet that gentleman.
Sure.
Mike, would you add to that category, though, those folks whose ridges, while still in existence, have been worn down through, let's say, work, someone handling rough material, bricks, what have you?
I wouldn't put them in that same category. There's friction ridge skin there, and
they're below the surface. So they, and the point I was getting to, the ridges are there, but they may not be able to be captured by the equipment.
Correct. That's what I was trying to say before, is that some people have interpreted the lack of ability to record everybody's fingerprints adequately,
yes,
as meaning that they didn't have friction ridge, and that's not true.
Yeah, John, let me add, too, we've used this term live scan machine, and perhaps not everybody is familiar with what a live scan machine, but for those who aren't, if you think of something like a copy machine, you've got a basic, very, very basic idea. It's much more sophisticated than a copy machine would ever dream of being, but that's what a live scan device is when you're capturing that image there. So again, there's maintenance that has to be that's required on those devices. They have to have a clean surface. The surface of the finger itself has to be pretty clean. So all those things go into capturing an image.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions here also that are actually, I think, related because they both relate to issues surrounding expectations of the examiner, cognitive psychology, that kind of thing. One of them talks about the Mayfield case. Because if you have a misidentification that doesn't get into court, in the Brandon Mayfield case, the individual was arrested, and obviously there have been a fair amount of concerns raised by him and others with respect to the fact that was that a misidentification that occurred because the examiners were given perhaps too much information about who he was, and so they ignored information in the identification that was actually contrary to the idea that he was the owner of the fingerprint, which actually, of course, we know now he was not. Do you think that there are there can be improvements, which the FBI laboratory has certainly put into place, in how fingerprints are presented to the examiner to make sure you have a clean, as it were, kind of identification process that happens?
Yes, that's. I would say that's one of the big movements or directions that the fingerprint community is embracing and moving forward with. We've always had a verification policy in place, and by that I mean an individual examiner makes a conclusion, comes to their decision. It can be that it is the same person, it absolutely is not the same person, or there just isn't enough information left in this fingerprint because of poor recording quality or the damage that's done in a latent fingerprint out of a crime scene type environment to the image. They can make those three decisions, but then that decision is then reinforced or checked by the fact that an independent examination by a second examiner, trained and competent examiner, is to take place. And there is concern that, if I'm an examiner that's been working with a fellow examiner for many, many years, and I make my decision and I just hand it to the second examiner, that there isn't going to be as stringent of a re-examination of that fingerprint by the second examiner. And a number of agencies are taking and making efforts. As a matter of fact, I just spoke to somebody this morning that called me and asked me about this as they were trying to set internal policy on within their own agency for what's being referred to as blind verification, where the fingerprints in question are going to be taken, no markings are going to be recorded on them by that first examiner, no information about their conclusion will be made available to the second examiner, and that second examiner will receive that comparison. I'm going to just use the term real quickly, cold turkey. In other words, they don't even know that another examiner had compared it, nor what their conclusion was, and they just start from scratch and make a complete re-examination of that fingerprint and come to their own conclusion, independent of anything that first examiner might have thought, which is kind of going in line with what you were trying to raise, I believe, John.
I think, this is Carol, I was thinking, is there also, John, or what you alluding to is also like context influence? Like that there have been some studies on that, although there's been some criticisms of those too, questioning it. But I know in the Mayfield case, that was one of the questions that came up is if you have a lot of information, is that going to influence your findings? And particularly, I think, just like Mike pointed out, you want to say, well, if you've worked together with this person, would you second guess basically their opinion? And in that particular case in Mayfield, I think there were 3 different people who agreed, and turned out they were all wrong. But I don't know, John, if you were alluding to, context and how much information people are given before they make their identification?
Well, yeah, that's part of it, and it even goes even broader than what you saw in the Mayfield case, because even looking at the AFIS systems, are the way in which the AFIS systems presenting potential matches biasing the examiner in some ways too, because you don't necessarily see the match as the #1 candidate coming from the AFIS system. And so are there ways that we can improve just the human interaction aspects of fingerprint examination in general?
If you can remember my comments earlier about what AFIS systems are, and I know that people that don't work with them on a regular basis and kind of look at these scenarios from a distance a little bit, don't realize that an examiner does not take that candidate list and tell themselves, well, you know what, it's probably going to be one of these first 2 or 3 candidates here on this list, and then try to go about making a comparison. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to say from my experience, you basically are only using that candidate list long enough to tell you which fingerprint card to pull, and then you begin your examination completely independent of anything that machine thought. Remember that in most cases where an AFIS system is used, it produces a candidate list every time, and virtually, and I'm going to say approximately 15 to 30% of the time, the actual donor or the actual owner of that fingerprint is found by checking that candidate list. That AFIS system is producing a candidate list that it can't even find a worthy candidate 70% of the time or more. And every other person on that list that is produced on that list, other than the one that eventually gets identified to or individualized to, those are all wrong answers. And examiners understand that. They know that this candidate list produced by this AFIS is meant to be nothing more than a tool, a starting place. Rather than looking at the first finger on the first card in the files and then continue on until you find it, it's just pointing out, try this one first, then that one, then that one. And you can go on and make those manual comparisons independent. One of the things that I must share with you, because part of what I do is run around the country trying to train fingerprint examiners right now. And we always start the training out by trying to reinforce 3 things that I think are very important to my fellow panelists, and I really think for those that have joined us today. And that's that we stress right from the beginning that your role in the criminal justice system as a fingerprint examiner is to be a totally, completely independent fingerprint expert. You're going to only allow the fingerprints themselves to tell you anything, speak to you, so to speak, and not allow any of these other things to come in and become part of the process that you use to make your decisions with. I must tell you honestly that, having done this for 20 years and managing it, you get a candidate list that spits out a number and a finger. And you don't know anything about the name. You don't know anything about the criminal history or past. And at the time I'm making my comparison based on that AFIS candidate list, I know only that I'm going to examine very carefully and closely a specific finger of a specific individual by number. And by number, I mean their FBI number, their state ID number, their Milwaukee Police Department ID number. And there's nothing in there about sex, race, name, past criminal history, possible involvement in a case. I'll go one step further. Investigators, detectives are very anxious people. They desperately want to get solves to crimes, and when they bring fingerprints to an examiner, sometimes they have suspects in mind, and they want to tell the examiner all about the suspect. Examiners are trained right from the get-go. They ask that investigator to leave, and they tell him very plain and simply that I'm not even going to begin the process comparing this fingerprint for you until you leave, because none of this information that you're so anxious to share with me is part of the process. I'm not going to consider it. I don't even want to know about it. Now, that is not going to, the fact that I'm sharing it with you or telling that to you is not going to belay the fears and concerns that very good people and with good reasons and everything else, but they're not going to be concerned about some of the things that you were talking about, Carol and John both. I just need to let you guys know that the community has been taught that you don't allow those influences in. And that's not to say that examiners aren't part of the human race, because they certainly are. And I can't account for, in the case of the Mayfield situation, that was a candidate number 4 off a candidate list of, I believe, 10 or 15 people. And they said no to the first one, no to the second one, no to the third one, got to that 4th one, and they saw things in there that they convinced themselves were the same in both those fingers, much to everybody's disappointment, especially the FBI themselves. They made a bad decision. And what ultimately totally and truly influenced that, I think only those examiners know for sure. But it's not, I would not be wanting to see that an alarm bell is being rung all over the place, that examiners are constantly being influenced by some of these things to the point where, the work can't be trusted and things like that, some of the concerns that I've heard voiced. And I'm just going to shut up for a little bit.
One of the questions from Jim Luthi is, what impact has the move to hire scientists rather than training 10-print examiners had on the field of latent prints examination? And I assume that's an allusion to, in part, the FBI lab I know now has decided that they're only going to hire those with a college degree rather, as latent print examiners. Is that something that's becoming common practice around the country, and is that having an impact on the profession?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and I have very strong feelings about that, coming from a non-college educated background, coming up as a police officer who turned into a fingerprint expert during his career without the benefit of the higher education and things. So I'm probably not the best person to ask that question, but I will give you my honest observations of what I do see going on around the country. And it is a move that is being made in certain places. For instance, the FBI lab that you were talking about, they do have substantial resources and things, and they are setting that bar a little bit higher as far as the education requirements for people coming in. In the past, they traditionally had brought in people out of their 10-print operation, what they call their tech section, who had years and years and years of looking at classifying and using the classifications and pattern type information to create our country's criminal history system. Those people had years of looking at fingerprints, and they had a very strong, pronounced background in knowing and seeing and observing and recognizing the various things that fingerprints do, so that when they were taught to take and look at less and less information in the form of a latent fingerprint and compare it to those same 10-print records, they had a much stronger basis and background to understand and comprehend quicker and easier, possibly, what it's going to take to make an identification on a latent fingerprint. Some people will tell you right now that coming out of this AFIS generation, I'm going to call it, and Peter's kind of alluded to it a little bit in some of his earlier comments, where operators are brought in, given very little training about traditional fingerprint type things, and operate AFIS systems, not the ones making latent identifications and things like that, but just simply using all that horsepower, that AFIS technology on a 10-print side. They no longer are looking at the fingerprints quite as closely, some people feel, that it makes it a strong benefit for them to move into the latent print community.
Carol, I'm going to send this over to Carol, too.
Well, actually, I was going to just respond to Mike, too. I have to say, I think, and seeing what goes on in education, too, just having education doesn't mean anything. I think really the training and skill and years of doing the work and looking at things really does make a difference. I mean, you have to say that experience, and in fact, it goes back to Charles Ilsley's study that said that the jurors were much more impressed by the experts' training and skill in the fingerprint community than by education that they possessed. So I think we have to take a look at that, with all areas of expertise, you could graduate with your degree in whatever it is, but you really have to have the time and service to really make those expert opinions, because you'll know, through experience what you can identify or what you can't. But go ahead, John.
Oh, that's great. And do you think that's true across all the forensic sciences and the forensic disciplines? I mean, I think I'd want to have a toxicologist have a certain level of education, for example.
Well, yes, I think, there's different, areas, and the thing is whether we even had programs. Now, this is what's a big difference today, is we never had, in the past, a fingerprint program. Now they do have those, like at West Virginia University and other places, where you can get trained in certain disciplines of forensic science. But for years you couldn't. It was on-the-job training with document examination, with a lot of other areas. Of course, with different things like DNA, if you have a chemistry background or, serology, those kinds of things. So I think it depends on the forensic area. And
I would very much agree with that.
Okay, good. Well, there's another question here, and that is, partly it's about the relationship with DNA. It starts off with a question that I think I'll address myself, and that is, don't almost all latent prints actually have DNA evidence within? The answer to that is yes. That is that so-called touch sample DNA or low copy number DNA does exist when you have a latent print. However, the ability to actually collect that DNA and analyze it is quite limited. There's only a handful of agencies in the United States that can do low copy number DNA of touch samples. New York actually does that, and has been very, very successful in applying that in burglary reduction, where they do collect DNA off of touch samples from burglary scenes, and have actually brought that into court successfully and solved a lot of cases. But that's very, very difficult to do because of the likelihood of interferences and mixtures and that kind of thing. You're talking about very low amounts of DNA that you need to be able to analyze to make that work. The second part of the question is, how has the reliance on DNA affected the demand for latent print evidence? Can any of you address that? Do you think that there's
before you go there, can I just make a comment on the previous question?
Yes, of course.
About the DNA, and that is DNA processing can be timely and expensive, but under certain circumstances you can make a latent print identification. And Mike, if you tell me if I'm right here, I believe I am, with nothing more than the exemplar, the 10 print card, your latent print, and a magnifying glass. I mean, it can be as simple as that. You've got a suspect, you've taken the prints, you look at them, and that can be relatively quick. You're not dealing with a lot of scientific apparatus and what have you.
Well, I'd like to amplify that just by saying it this way. In my tenure in Milwaukee, we were literally taking and walking off the crime scene with a lift out of that crime scene, entering it into AFIS, and before the detectives and other people had left the crime scene, we'd already been able to determine who the suspect was with that fingerprint.
Well, so fingerprints are fast and cost-effective, and typically it takes weeks, unless it's a high-profile case, to do a DNA analysis.
And again, you can make some of those identifications under the right circumstances if you do have a suspect, even without using AFIS.
Absolutely. And I would like to add one other additional thing that I think is very germane to anybody thinking about comparing fingerprints to DNA at this point in history, and that's that our AFIS databases of known bad guys, of the 10 fingers and palms and sides of the fingers and so forth, that we've been creating now very aggressively, as Peter said. We're fingerprinting everything we can nowadays. That far outstrips the size of the database of known bad guys that you can search against with unknown samples of DNA. Your chances, if I was going to be not a fingerprint geek for a minute, and just wear the hat of somebody who just wants to figure out who did the bad thing, I would infinitely want to take my chances with a fingerprint over DNA, just solely from the mathematical standpoint that my chances of finding who the bad guy was mathematically are so infinitesimally greater with a fingerprint right now because of the size of the database times 10 fingers of possible matches, that I would much rather take my chance with the fingerprint than that DNA. But the thing that's nice about all of this is we're not limited to just one or the other. If I have a firearm used in the commission of a crime, one of the common questions I get asked all the time is, well, how often are you going to get a fingerprint off of that, Mike? Well, if I had 100 guns, if I'm really having a good day, I might get fingerprints off of 10 of those 100 guns. because of the texture of the handle, the surfaces that are handled that are going to leave behind the fingerprint, the oily residue, and there's all kinds of things that work against the fingerprint being found. But if I, in addition to swabbing the trigger and the trigger guide ring and a few other things, I can get DNA, that's all the better. I don't want to see fingerprints, being compared to DNA in that respect as to ultimately we can get rid of fingerprints because everything's going to have DNA and so forth. I think that's very short-sighted and kind of foolish. But the great thing about the way technology is going for us now and the inclusion of DNA is that we're going to just have that many more opportunities to figure out who they are. But right now, those databases that we can search against with fingerprints are astronomically greater than any other type of forensic discipline at all. We don't have known samples of bad guys' hair. We don't have known samples of bad guys' footprints that can be matched against from their footwear and tires and on and on. But we really do have that with fingerprints. And one of the sad things is that we're not being able to take advantage of all of that for a variety of different reasons, including some that are on the slides that we didn't get a chance to look at.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
but
Carol.
one thing to follow up on what Mike says, which I think is great, is using more than one technology. Okay, if you can use the fingerprints and the DNA together, the same thing we're seeing with bite mark evidence and DNA, and even as Peter talked about that multimodal identification, which combining different types of biometrics. I think that's really where the future is where we're able to put the different technologies together and get more information that way.
Yeah.
And they support each other. And then some of the doubts that folks are having with regard to bias and some of those other things, they start to go away when you do have the multiple disciplines being able to be brought to the table, like Carol was just mentioning.
One more question. We have time for one more question, and then,
okay.
then we're going to have to wrap up. And it's a relatively straightforward one, I think, and that is, what would happen if someone did prints in a reverse order or deliberately changed the sequence? For example, an index finger for a third finger, that kind of thing.
In an AFIS system?
Well, I guess this person is referring to when the prints are collected.
Most of the live scan devices we're talking about have built-in features to eliminate sequencing errors, which that would be. In other words, you're capturing your images, and in addition to the 10 rolled images, as you have on a fingerprint card, you also have those plane impressions on the bottom, where you take the right hand, the 4 fingers of the right hand, the 4 fingers of the left hand, and then the 2 thumbs. And there's comparisons that are built in there. They're looking for the minutia points on those individual images to make sure you've got number 3 finger in the plane matches up, the minutia match up with number 3 that's rolled. But that also would require some sort of collusion and collaboration. AFIS systems also have the ability to, depending upon how they're designed, to search on more than one finger. You can search on 1 finger, 2 fingers, 4 fingers. You can search on all 10 fingers. You can search on 20 fingers. You can search on those 10 fingers on the top and the 10 fingers on the bottom, and if they're repeated events that you have finger images for, to search on those as well. So all things are possible, but if it's some sort of deliberate error like that did get by the booking officer, it would probably cause a flag to be raised. We've seen instances where people have surgically had their fingertips placed upside down, and apparently paid a lot of money for that. That is, their finger images on, or fingertips on fingers number 2, number 7, and some others were surgically cut and rotated 180 degrees, and then, in effect, put back on. And those really raise a lot of bells.
Yeah, they mostly raise a lot more attention to themselves than allow anonymity.
That's right, like John Dillinger, didn't he try to put acid on his fingertips, and that made him even more, I guess, identifiable?
Well, one of the advantages of AFIS systems, among so many, is that they are more dealing with a technical search. Your name isn't so much important. Your height, your weight, whatever name you use, it's those biometrics. It's those finger images. Do those finger images match? And that has led to, we refer to them as consolidations, where someone was arrested for a multitude of events, a multitude of crimes perhaps, but by having some understanding of how some of these AFIS systems, the identification systems work before AFIS, were able to use aliases. But when AFIS systems came in, they searched their own database and said, you know, we've got Komarinski here under 5 different names. He's Komarinski, he's Morgan, he's Henderson, and he's Campbell. Whoever he is, he's the same person. So you can find out who he is.
That with that, which is actually a hopeful sign because it shows that we're actually better at identifying criminals than sometimes the criminals are able to hide from the criminal justice system and doing. So I very much want to thank all of the participants today, Peter, Mike, and Carol, for all of the input that you've given. I'd like to thank the audience for bearing with us as we've gone into a great deal of detail, and I just wish we had even more time. It's taken 2 hours, and we've covered a lot of ground, and obviously there's a lot more ground that we could cover on this very, very rich subject. So thank you all for everyone for your participation. I'm going to
thank you.
Pass it back off to you, Jim.
Thank you, John. Well, first I'd like to thank our panel and our moderator today. This was fantastic, and we'd like to offer the opportunity to our audience, as well as our panelists and moderator, if you have the time and are curious, to join us in our text-based chat room for some post-event chatter on what you've just heard. And I'm going to show everybody how to get there. I'm going to share my browser window here. And the first step is to come to the Government Innovators Network website, and the address there is www.innovations.harvard.edu. Once you're at the home page, you're going to want to scroll down to the Spotlight section, which is at the right side of the screen. And the second spotlight is Fingerprint Analysis, Post-Event Chat Room. Click on that link, and you'll see a field to enter your name. And once you have done that, you should find yourself in the chat room, and hopefully others will be there with me shortly. I'm going to leave the instructions up in live meeting, but once you've gotten into the room successfully, you can close out live meeting. You don't need to keep live meeting open in order to for the chat room to operate. Okay, those are the instructions for those who missed it. Thank you, everybody, again, for making today's event a success.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You want me to